Um,
Are we ready? Well, good evening. We are very grateful to welcome Dr. Tom Dickelman here this evening to our Fireside Chat. Tom, as you probably know, founded the Community Church of Lake Forest, Lake Bluff. I think it was a little over 20 years ago. And I know many people here have had the opportunity to become involved in the church and attend the services, both at Lake Bluff Beach and the chapel at Lake Forest College. And this morning, the inspiring annual Grateful Dead service rocked the house there. And who else was there? I had my tie-dye on, Jeff had his tie-dye on. Tom is an ordained Presbyterian minister and an experienced corporate trainer, speaker, and consultant, and also a published author. I'm going to hold up his book, which is on the table over there. It's called Garage Sale Buddha, a Maverick Minister's Marginally Cultured Pearls of Wisdom. And it came out last year. I can tell you that it's very inspiring, very entertaining and enlightening. And Tom just said that he has another book coming out very soon. It's at the editor now, and it's called Doing, I think with the Doing the God. Yeah, so I want to make sure I got that right. Doing the God thing. So Tom says that he originally started out writing a book about his experiences learning how to play golf without taking any lessons at all. And then he kind of switched gears and he wrote this book. So we'll leave it to him to tell you more about this. He says he dreams of not being the worst golfer in every force. So I have to say that Tom was our neighbor in Lake Bluff for many years when he was at the Union Church, and he showed great Christian forbearance and was more than tolerant and welcoming to our children who decided to use the Union Church property as their hangout spot with their little junior high friends. So thank you for that and for speaking for us this evening. And one more thing, I will say that we all know people who have started businesses, who have started philanthropic organizations, who have started clubs, but I don't think anybody else here probably knows anyone who started a church. So I think that's pretty incredible. So thank you, Tom. Well,
and thank you. I am delighted to be here with all of you. A couple folks I want to recognize. First of all, thank you, Ann, and to the committee and Anwencia. I can tell you that our family is delighted to be part of the Anwencia family. Second, I want to acknowledge three people, my wife, Jean, and our son, Tommy, and also my partner in ministry now for 3.5 years, Sean Miller, who's seated by the Campbells there along the aisle, and for their love and support and encouragement. I am grateful and absolutely would never have been able to start the church, nor would I have a great sense of its future without you. And what the plan is, I probably have about 20 minutes worth of a few stories and such. And then following that, we'll open it up to a few questions if you have questions, and we'll go from there. How's that sound? Pretty good. One of the things I love about Anwencia are the glorious red-tailed hawks that glide out there high above the property, carving sweeping turns to the left and to the right, soaring with inspired power and grace. And as I gaze skyward at them with a deep sense of awe, I get into wondering, what would it be like to soar aimlessly above life's fray, with seemingly not a care in the world? Well, you probably know that those dreamy notions of mine are rather ill-informed. For my sophomore perception of a hawk's life is the antithesis of their reality, because raptor experts tell us that the flights of a hawk are almost always intensely focused and purpose-oriented. They are constantly in a search for their next meal. As a preacher, a trader in words, I kind of see myself like a hawk. Certainly not because of my powerful or graceful movements, So sometimes my golf balls do take sweeping turns left and right. But I'm akin to a hawk because for 40 years as a minister, my life has been a constant search for meals, not to feed myself, but to feed my brothers and sisters and the people in our church on a Sunday morning. And I pursue that in a way unlike many clerics and fellow ministers who spend the majority of their time in book-lined studies, paging through volume after volume of thick theological tomes and dog-eared Bibles. Instead, as a hawk or like a hawk, I spend most of my time outside the nest. And like a hawk each day, I scan the landscape of our lives in search of the next Sunday morning meal. My motivation? Well, it's the very first lesson, the very first important lesson that I ever learned in ministry. And it's this: every single person present on Sunday morning, whether it's in the upholstered chairs of the Lily Reed Chapel at Lake Forest College, or the resin chairs of the Lake Bluff Beach where we meet for our services all summer long, every single person who is there is fighting some kind of battle. And I have the extraordinary privilege and challenge of trying to feed those people in a manner that will positively impact their spiritual and their life journeys. And so, like a hawk, I'm forever preparing and searching for meals. And tonight, in a variation on that theme, I asked a question of a few of you. Here's the question: what does a preacher like me say to members of a country club that he counts himself very fortunate to be part of? My search yielded some great replies. My favorite was someone who suggested that I leave my ukulele at home. But the main themes that offered were: tell us how and why you ever became a minister. And what's the deal with starting your own church? And finally, what do you think is going to happen to the church today, which by all accounts seems to be dying? So I began to pull some thoughts together over the past couple of weeks based on your guidance. And as I did, some background noise kept interrupting my focus. Like a steady drumbeat kept saying, pay attention to me, or like a child or a grandchild that's always tugging at your sleeve, pay attention to me. Ultimately, I couldn't disregard what I'd heard. And let me ask you if you were tuned into the same thing. The last 2 weeks, something that was on the news or in the news on a daily basis. It's a 2-letter acronym, both vowels: AI, artificial intelligence. There has not been a single day that I have not heard or read or talked about artificial intelligence. In the New York Times, every single day for the past week. Open up the weekend Wall Street Journal, there it is on the front page. College students writing their papers using AI. Professors uncertain what to do. One business executive who said, artificial intelligence, it's awesome. It's better than a fleet of interns. AI not just disrupting, but changing the world as we know it. And so, like a hawk who must pay attention, not just to what they want to talk about or preach about, but instead what the world is saying. I felt like I had to weave in AI into this little conversation today. And so I went to ChatGPT, which every one of us has access to for free. You can go home and put in any question you like. Here's the question I put in: what should the local minister say to his fellow country club members? And here's the reply. Here's the reply that I received in just under 10 seconds. I quote, as an AI language model, I cannot access any specific information about a local minister's situation or context. And I don't have any knowledge about the particular country club or its members, though I do know all about Rod Workman. No, I just added that part. It just added that part. It continues though with this. However, in general, a local minister may consider sharing a message of community and togetherness, emphasizing the importance of supporting one another during difficult times. End quote. That last sentence struck me as really interesting, supporting one another during difficult times. It's something I know a thing or two about. I grew up in West Suburban Glen Ellen, and in 1971, my 40-year-old father died unexpectedly, leaving my 40-year-old mother, who had left DePaul after just 1 year to marry my dad, leaving her with a son just starting college, a son, yours truly, just starting high school, and my little sister Sue in grade school. My mom was as traditional, leave it to Beaver, Ozzie and Harriet mom as there ever was. She hadn't worked since she was 18 years old, when she made 50 cents an hour working at a dress shop out in Geneva in the Fox Valley. And you know what helped my mom at age 40? Devastated, maybe more than anything beyond a therapist and a few dear friends, what helped my mom more than anything was our country club, a place called Glen Oak. Maybe some of you have been there. My grandfather had been a member. My dad had been a member. And upon my father's death, the club gave my mom back in 1971 what they called a lady associate membership. So she could play golf and participate in the club just like anyone else. And 50 years ago, back in the 1970s, probably even more so than today, suburban life was all about couples and it was all about families. Very few comfortable, socially comfortable places for someone who was single or who was alone or divorced or widowed. And yet at Glen Oak, my mom had this wonderful, safe outlet, place where she could be herself, where she could engage with others and get outside in the winter and once in a while shoot skeet. And every summer she became a really good golfer. And while preacher types like me, I'm afraid, often find country clubs to be low-hanging fruit to take cheap shots at, bemoaning the inherent dangers of exclusivity, I'm not blowing smoke when I tell you my experience is just the opposite, because I've seen firsthand the wonderful, wonderful role that places like Glen Oak and Onwentsia can play in someone's lives. Like with my mom, who at her club found compassion and support when she needed it most. Now, while it was a country club that threw a life ring to my mother when she was drowning in sadness and despair, for me, it was the church that loved me back to life. Mainly, it was through two ministers who are now in their middle 80s and still dear friends, Bill Enright and Charlie Alcorn. And when my dad died and nothing in the world made sense to me, they didn't try and provide me with those sorts of answers that ministers often do. Oh, well, Tommy, it's God's will. Or that line that makes my skin crawl when people say, oh, well, they're in a better place. Because all I can think is, no, his place is with God. They didn't give me any of those cheap, kind of easy answers. Instead, They stood by me and loved me through the wilderness of my teenage years and my 20s. And ultimately, I became a minister not because I had a dramatic born again experience, not because I heard angelic voices from on high saying, Tom, you should be a minister. No, I just wanted to be like these two guys because I saw something really special in them that I wanted for my life as well. And so from high school on, I wanted to be a minister. And upon graduating from the University of Utah, I was all set to head to seminary. I'd been accepted and felt I could begin to craft this meaningful life like Bill had and like Charlie had. But there were a couple of problems. First, my faith was immature at best, and there's no way that I was ready to go to seminary. And secondly, living out in Utah, I just wasn't done skiing yet. So I worked as a bartender and did a little of this and a little of that. And for a while, I lived in a yellow old VW microbus. And for a time, I came back and worked for Colgate, selling dental pharmaceuticals. And Dr. Campbell, with due respect of people in your profession, it was a tough gig calling on dentists 40 hours a week, trying to sell gauze sponges and prophylaxis paste. And so I quit that pretty quickly and decided to head out to Utah for just one more ski season. And my second year after graduating from college, I worked from 6 to 10 in the morning cleaning the women's gymnasium at the University of Utah. And I truly remember this moment as if it were an hour ago. But it was a weekday morning, and I had just cleaned the mirror in one of the restrooms I was charged with cleaning. And I looked in that mirror, and what I saw was something I didn't really like, which was a tobacco chewing, pinched between my cheek and gum, barely employed ski bum with shoulder length hair and a lightning bolt pierced ear. And all that stuff was on the outside, but most of all inside, I could not have been more empty. And I was going nowhere pretty fast. So I said, Tommy, it's time to get your act together. And so I spent 1 year at San Francisco Seminary and then 2 years at McCormick Seminary. And I had the privilege of working at the Fourth Presbyterian Church downtown, which was an extraordinary experience. And in 1983, I got my diploma from McCormick Theological Seminary, and it was signed by none other than the first woman chair of the McCormick Seminary Board, an amazing woman by the name of Margaret Hall. And I think there's anybody here in spirit today, it's probably your sweet mom. She was the first connection I ever had to Lake Forest and Lake Bluff. And then after I graduated, in a long series of amazing things that happened in my life that I can't imagine why I had such good fortune, but I received what was probably or arguably the best job in the United States for a minister graduating from seminary. And that was at Second Presbyterian Church in Indianapolis, which was the other really significant, sizable Presbyterian church in the Midwest. And the gentleman who had just taken over that church as a senior minister was a guy who was so sweet to me when I was a kid out in Glen Ellen, Bill Enright. And I suppose that being a young minister, I was on a track where you serve as an associate minister at a substantial, well-known church like that for 5 years. And then you go on to get your own mid-sized church. And if you grow that, pretty soon by the time you're 40, you have your own church and a couple ministers working for you, and maybe a membership at the local country club. And in 3.5 years in Indianapolis, given this incredible high-profile opportunity, everything that anyone wanting to begin a career in ministry could want, I was miserable. It wasn't fate, partly because of my own lack of maturity, but also because the bureaucracy in a place like that, and the endless committee meetings, and the politics, and the emphasis on finance. And it's like, if this is what ministry is about, I am out of here. And so I quit. I sold my house. And the toughest thing of all was I gave away my dog. And I put everything in storage, and I strapped my windsurfer to the roof of my old Saab, and I headed to Florida to find the sailboat of my dreams. And I had no idea what I was going to do other than sail and not do ministry. And of course, everyone in my world, ranging from my family to the wonderful folks at the church in Indianapolis, thought I was a little bit crazy, and I'm quite certain that I was. But I was simply following what was the second of three great lessons that I have learned as a minister and about life. And it's this: you don't want to be at the end of your life kicking yourself for all the stuff that you've never gone for. You don't want to be at the end of your life bemoaning what you had never pursued or tried. And since high school, I had dreamed of living on a boat and sailing. And so, to make a very long story short, I found my dream boat in Fort Myers Beach. Her name was Ella. Rob, you're a sailor. She was a 32-foot double ender that weighed over 20,000 pounds. She was really heavy, 42 feet in a keylock design. And I had purchased her from a man who had literally sailed her all the way around the world by himself. Well, I bought the boat, and he didn't take anything off except his clothing and his passport. And it was the biggest mess in the world. So it was going to take me a number of months to make this boat, to clean it up and to make it sail again. And so right after I purchased it, I was out visiting with my dear friends, Johnny B. and Barbara Smith, who had kind of adopted me when we lived in Indianapolis. And Johnny B. and Barbara lived on Sanibel, right near Fort Myers Beach. And Johnny B. was just a big old bear of a man. He said, "Well, Tom, you show me pictures of that boat. I don't think there's any way you could live on there. And while you're trying to rehab it, why don't you just come out and stay in our house? We're going to be gone traveling most of the winter. You'd be doing us a favor." And so I said, okay. And this is in the days for the internet, for email, cell phones, and all of that, where we all know what everybody's doing nowadays. So the only time anybody had an idea what I was doing was when I got out the quarters and went to the payphone. And so my family, for the most part, with the exception of my mom and sister that I kept in touch with, nobody knew what was going on. All the people in Indianapolis are thinking, "Dickelman, what is his deal? He's homeless. He's living in that Saab, driving around Florida. Who knows what his deal is?" And in reality, I was living for free in a 5-bedroom beachfront estate on the Gulf of Mexico with a housekeeper who kept the refrigerator stocked and did my laundry. Well, I moved aboard Ella and did some sailing. And yet again, I think it's just part of who I am, or maybe it's part of being a minister. I'm not sure which, but I always pay close attention to the environment. And after about a year, I realized a couple things. First, just like being a ski bum, a sailing bum, it's a lot sexier sounding than it really is. Second, I realized that I could run forever. But the truth is, I'm just wired in such a way that I need to do something meaningful. I don't know why it's that way. I don't know how I turned out that way. That's just my deal. For me to be happy and alive, I had to do something that had meaning. And then finally, and this is most interesting maybe of all, there's a lot of people on sailboats and power boats who live in marinas uh, who are on the run from themselves, on the run from their past, on the run from their mistakes, on the run from their addictions, on the run from the law. And if you want to hang out with an interesting group of people, go live in a marina for a while. Okay. But here's what I noticed happened is that without ever thinking about this, I had sort of become a de facto chaplain and caregiver in this marina. We weren't necessarily talking about God and things like that, but I had become a caregiver without even realizing it. And so I came to understand that despite the fact that I'm like a square peg trying to fit into a round hole when it comes to the institutional church, the truth is I'm a minister through and through. What I needed was a different context, which brought me here. To Lake Bluff in 1988, when I was lucky enough to go to the Union Church with Shelley Borders, was part of the team that brought me there and is still a member there. And Ellie, I'm speaking the truth when I say that in 1988, the Union Church was a mess. Well, there. In fact, it was such a mess that they already had a quiet committee exploring what the options were for selling the church and the property and where that money would go in case things didn't work out with this new minister Dickelman. They didn't tell me anything about that committee before I signed on the dotted line. Well, it went well. The church had gone from 200 members down to 66 in 5 years. The budget was smaller than a youth ministry budget in Indianapolis. There had been a fight over a pipe organ. That was one of the primary reasons for all that loss of members. And yet it could not have been a more perfect fit for me because all the people like Ellie, who had been holding this church together with everything they could for a number of years, basically said to me, you know what? Do whatever you want. Go for it. And that was exactly what I needed to hear. Because as a minister, more than anything, I'm kind of an entrepreneur. I like starting things and fixing things. So in 5 years, we pretty much tripled the attendance and more than doubled the budget and rehabbed most of the church and the Sunday school that didn't exist when I started because of some great volunteers. By the time I left, had 100 kids signed up. But after 6.5 years, I was absolutely burned out. And I just needed a break because one week, I was sitting in the office and all I could think was, you know what? I don't know what I believe in. And so I couldn't envision myself climbing into the pulpit and with any enthusiasm or passion, speaking to these people who out there were fighting some kind of battle. And so I was very fortunate because during the time I had been at the Union Church, I had done consulting and some corporate training, and I could go out and make a living. And so that wasn't the issue. And I did that for a while. And because when I was at the Union Church, had gone back to McCormick Seminary and got a doctorate that was mostly in organizational revitalization and marketing, I was marketable myself. And then I went to Lake Forest College as special assistant to the president. And at the college, I enjoyed so much of my work for David Spatafor, a great guy. But you know what? I am not so good with bureaucracies. Maybe you figured that out by now. And with due respect for the wonderful people at the college, that is molasses, slow bureaucracy there. And the politics in higher education were just like they are in the church. And I remember sitting in the office next to David's and thinking about something that I had set aside a few years prior. I had this idea of something called the micro church. And I remember exactly when it came to me because I was at a Rotary Club meeting and Rick Mancuso was talking about his micro car dealership. And I, of course, had heard about microbreweries. And it's something that it's a group or a business or a church or whatever that doesn't try to do everything, but they try to do a couple things really well. And my notion of the micro church was that we wouldn't try and compete with the Presbyterians down the street with thousands of members. We try to do a couple things really well. We'd have awesome and inspiring Sunday worship, and we provide great, compassionate pastoral care. And I went to the professor in charge of all that at the seminary, Carl Dudley, and he had these giant kind of hairy carry glasses that were always on the tip of his nose. And he read my proposal, and then he looked over those glasses at me and said, "Well, Tom, this is really interesting, but you can't write your doctoral thesis on this. Why?" "Well, because it'll never work." And so, respecting what he said, I put it aside. But then as I sat in my office at the college, I kept thinking about this micro church and feeling like I needed to apply that second great lesson I had learned in my life one more time, that you don't want to be at the end of your life kicking yourself for the things that you've never tried or done. And that was the one thing I had in my life that if I envisioned dying 30 or 40 or 50 years down the road, I would be bummed that I didn't go for it and give it a try. And so at age 40, while working full-time at the college and also having this consulting and corporate training practice on the side, and with my wife, Jean, and we had 3 children, I decided that I had to go for it and start a micro church. And God bless Jean because she supported me and encouraged me, recognizing that it was probably the craziest of all my ideas, but she knew that I had to go for it. And in September of 1999, I rented the college chapel and sent out postcards because not many people were doing email back then. And I sent out postcards, and a bunch of people actually showed up. And one person characterized that first experience of what I called then the community worship hour. They characterized it as Jesus meets the prairie home companion. Well, what I did in starting the micro church was the exact opposite of how everybody else in the world starts churches. Usually you get a team of people together and some people who have money, and then a denomination or surrounding area churches all give you money. But what happens is you spend all your time being accountable to all those people who gave you money, not unlike a politician who gets big donations. And I didn't want anything to do with that. And so I used what savings we had and ultimately had a second mortgage on our house. And I didn't put any committee together. I just did it because I had what I thought was this clear vision. Well, I just wanted to do it in the way that I wanted to do it. And so I didn't put together a church plan. I put together a business plan, and it was all based on one question. In Lake Forest and Lake Bluff, what's the need that exists that I have the unique capacity to meet? What's the need that exists that I have the unique capacity to meet? And then I spent some time like a hawk scanning the spiritual landscape. And what I found is that there were a lot of people who were interested in having a spiritual life, but who were sick of organized religion, getting their arm twisted to give, getting their arm twisted to come to the potluck, getting their arm twisted to join, frustrated with political agendas and endless committee meetings, an emphasis on buildings, which is a noose around so many churches right now. And so I endeavored to create a place that neutralized all these matters that kept people from church and ultimately from faith. And my notion was that someday we might be able to have as many as 80 families that we could be impactful and that we could be financially viable. And now, 25 years later, we still don't have formal members. People just show up if it feels good for them. And if they support what we do, then they put something in the hat. It's about as pure an economic model as there ever was. It's also about as idealistic as you could possibly get, but it works. And it's been a long time since we went past 80 families. We probably have about 350 families right now. People, maybe one person is a family, or 7 people could be a family, but who consider themselves part of our church. We're independent. We don't have a formal membership process, no committees, no bureaucracy. We have one group of 6 people, you know many of them, those are members here, who keep an eye on the finances, and I steer clear of that. We're known for a second to none music program, and Kids Uganda, which was a charity we started, that in its heyday of 10 years, we raised over $1.5 million to support orphans in a community outside called Mityana, Uganda, and sent over 75 people from our communities to do short-term mission trips. And finally, what people know us for is our beach services, which begin at 9 o'clock on, May 21st? Is that right? Or 20th? Final thought, and then any questions. I have to say, it's absolutely gone better with the community church than I ever could have imagined or could ever have deserved. In large measure, that's because this foundational idea that I had of the micro church was okay, but things really only started to gel when I, like a hawk, started paying attention to the people around me who said, you know what, maybe we should have a group of people doing stewardship rather than good point. And so it's the family that formed that really made it, what it is today. I'm just the guy who started it. And the third and final great lesson, along with recognizing that everybody's always fighting a battle, and the same is true with this room right now. There's not a single person here that doesn't have something going on. Maybe we know about it, maybe we don't. But the first lesson is everyone's always fighting some kind of battle. The second is don't make it to the end of your life kicking yourself for all the things you never tried or went for. And the third is this foundational principle of the community church, that growth is a result, not a goal. We don't keep track of members because all that does is send us down the wrong road. Instead, our focus is trying to do the things that we believe God wants us to do and the community needs us to do. And that's our focus. And so we have not spent a lot of time, going over the numbers. Because if you do the right things for the right reasons, more often than not, good things happen and the numbers take care of themselves. I could go on forever, but I don't want to do that to you. Are there any questions you all have? I will say that Ann mentioned I wrote a book called Garage Sale Buddha. What it is about 75 different little vignettes from ministry and life. And it's about starting a church. It's about some business ideas that I have. It's about the spiritual life. And it's also about some pretty interesting and fun experiences that I didn't get into today. So if anybody would like a book, they're over there, and I'd be happy to sign them if you like. Dr. Falls, did you have a question?
Yeah, I want to elaborate a little bit on what your conception of micro church is. I mean, that's
The micro church?
the term, I,
Well, think about a micro brewery. The world is filled with microbreweries. There's one in Lake Bluff right now, and they don't make the most beer in the world like Anheuser-Busch or Coors or someone like that. What they do is in smaller batches with really high quality. And the fact of the matter is, someone who's starting out a church can't compete with larger churches like Church of the Holy Spirit or First Press, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have the resources. We don't have the ability to provide those programs. So I, in looking at the community, said, well, what really matters most? And my sense was that people needed to be fed on Sunday morning because everybody's fighting a battle, and because you probably have a sense of this from all the years of practicing medicine. Not only is everybody fighting a battle, but people are working so hard just to keep it going, whether it's someone who needs to make their numbers for that quarter, otherwise they lose their job and maybe lose their house. So I don't think of the micro church, or me as a minister of what was a micro church, as someone wanting to get them to believe like I do. What I want to do is try and, as a minister, equip them with tools and resources for their life. And so the micro church would be a place where the minister actually knows the name of every single person in that church and has relationships with them, and doesn't spend all their time trying to get them to go to programs that they may not want to go to anyways. And the micro church, God bless Carl Dudley, but you know what? It worked. In our case, it just sort of worked better than we ever imagined. And but that's sort of a good problem to have. Kitty?
Do seminaries now and McCormick, I guess especially, do they look upon your church and I mean, are there seminaries using that as a template? You've been incredibly successful in what you've done, and I think that would be something that, I mean, seminaries are so different than they were 40, 50, 60 years ago, that they have to look at, I would think, the changing in church attendance and say, is this something that we should support more?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe 10 years ago, feeling like I'm about the luckiest guy around because I get to do what I want to do, where I want to do it, and in the way I want to do it. And usually if people get 2 out of 3, they're pretty good. And I'm so fortunate to have all 3 of those. And so my sense was I need to get back. And so I went to McCormick Seminary and I started something called the Center for Innovative Ministry. And the idea was to get the word out about this template and also use some of the tools that I had learned and utilized to help our church succeed relative to innovation, to give those tools to others. And so I went around to churches in the Midwest. We paid for it all, didn't cost anybody a penny, in providing innovative tools to help people solve problems as well as to create opportunities. And it was a pretty brutal failure. And the reason it was is because so many cultures are so ingrained in how things are done. As in, we're not serving Starbucks at coffee hour. We've been doing burgers for 50 years, and that's been just fine. Men stay out of the kitchen. And smaller church cultures. I mean, there was one church on the far south suburbs of Chicago that I went to. The churches in that area came together on a Saturday morning, And I got there early and I walked in, I was the only person there. And I walked in around the church and I noticed on the office door was a mailbox for the minister, for the custodian, for the secretary, and then for 8 committees that the church had. And started the program, everyone introduced themselves, and I said, wait a second, we don't have anyone here from our host church. Why is that? And one lady raised her hand from a neighboring community, and she said, well, tomorrow they're taking a vote to close the church. And I said, well, what's up? And she said, well, for years, they've only had 22 people on their rolls, and only 14 people show up on Sunday. And there's a story right there. They're so set in stone, their bureaucracy on how they do things. They only have 14 people show up on Sunday, but they still have 8 committees. You know? And so, and churches tend to be so important to people in faith communities that they don't want to change. And so that's why I hold very little hope for the church that everywhere throughout the United States and beyond is dying. I am an absolute optimist by nature. Otherwise, I wouldn't still be playing golf, you know? I absolutely am an optimist, but when it comes to the church, I hold very little hope. And the reason is because more than anything, the church is not meeting the needs of people who live in their communities. And churches are all worried about how it is that we can grow and stay alive and get bigger and keep going. And instead of looking internally, they need to look outside themselves. What are the needs of the people who exist in the community and how can we meet them? And that's really what I found in our church. And we continue to focus on that, not making our lives easier for Sean and for me, but what are the needs of people in this community that we have the capacity to meet? And that's not what I see the institutional church doing. The other thing I used to be Presbyterian, I'm not anymore. And the stated clerk of the Presbyterian Church 2 years ago was asked the question, Reverend, how is it that the Presbyterian Church in the United States of America has suffered membership losses for 52 straight years? And his response was, well, I see it as kind of a new Reformation. You know, that sort of thinking, I don't think that pattern's going to change. The one bit of hope that I have, there's a wonderful woman by the name of Phyllis Tickle. She was Dickel and Tickle. Well, Professor Tickle was an amazing writer, a gifted teacher. She was a mother of like 6 kids who lived on a farm. She was one of those amazing people in life. And she had this theory. And she said, you know, the church is going to struggle. And it's probably not going to stop in any of our lifetimes. That's just the reality. It's probably not going to get better. But in every 500 years, the Christian church in the world seems to hold this great rummage sale. And the first one was in the Council of Nicaea, when everybody from churches around the world got together and they thought about who was a heretic and who wasn't. And they thought that's going to be the end of the church. And it turned out to be a really good thing because people got together and talked. And then about 1,000, what happened? A big split between the Roman Church and the Orthodox Church, the East and the West. And oh no, it's all going to hell in a handbasket. The Christian church is done. Guess what? It came back better than ever. And then 500 years after that, 1500, Martin Luther and a few others spoke up, right? And everybody's like, oh no, this is nothing but conflict. What happened? The church came back more vibrant than ever. And so that's the kind of hope that I hold, not for us fixing what doesn't work right now, but for there to be almost like a kind of, well, if you've been out on the golf course, did you see where they burned a couple weeks ago? So much of the course already, there are beautiful plants springing forth. And that's what I think is going to happen to the church. It's going to die, the church that we know it. But something that meets the needs of people more effectively and more efficiently is going to rise forth. I only wish that I would be here to see that. Who knows? Mike?
For sharing your journey of where you've been, and where you are, and the inflection moments, the energy of the youthfulness, and the inflection moments there that brought you into a new chapter. And as you see yourself here, as you see Sean here with you, as you see the church bigger than you forward, as you look at 10, 15 years from now, looking back, what does this next decade have? To the extent you want to share, you might not know that, but in a sense, 10 years from now, in 2025 or 2035, excuse me, what does that have like for you and the community church and the impact that you'll choose to do at this point, or are you just gonna hang out in the quiet neighborhoods of Michigan?
Give me 10 seconds. I'm going to ask ChatGPT. Mike, what I could tell you is what I told our congregation about 2 months ago, that from this point forward, I'm going to work hard at doing less. I'm a little bit out of gas, to be honest. I'm excited that I hope we'll be able to play more golf. Kim has completely changed my swing. I have hope. I rounded up the game with Bob Barnett and Dr. Fall, so I'm excited about that. If there's one common theme throughout my entire journey, Mike, it's that I have just been fortunate and blessed in ways that I never, ever could deserve. That's just how it's gone. At the end of the day, I think I work harder than anybody I know. But I also have been so fortunate, it's unbelievable. And the greatest recent fortune was a little over 3 years ago when Sean Miller joined our church staff. One of the problems with ministry is, sorry, but the talent pool is about this deep because people are not choosing to go into ministry these days, frankly, for good reason. You know, there's not a lot of great folks out there like Luke Back or like Sean Miller. Why would you go into a ministry? It's a dying enterprise, right? And you make economic sacrifices and time sacrifices, et cetera, et cetera. It's an incredible struggle. So people aren't going into the ministry, and yet we were so fortunate to be able to get Sean on board. And I don't have any question that he could have his pick of churches all throughout the United States because of the kind of preacher he is and the kind of leader he is. And yet he came to us. And I think it's because of the kind of people that are in this community, because he has family here, and because I purposely created our church in such a way so that a minister could actually have a life and not spend all their time at committee meetings every night of the week. We don't have committees. And guess what? Everything goes pretty well. So the reason I want to hang around at the church and here in Lake Forest is because I want to see what happens, because I'm so excited about the future. But I'm also excited about doing a little less than I've done. Well, Reverend Miller back there is a 6 index, which means that he spends far less time in the nest than he should. I am working towards being a 15.
All right.
That's my goal. That's my stated goal, to be a 15. I can do it. We'll see. But I am, even being able to be here with all of you, once again, I feel so filled with gratitude. Thank you. If anybody wants a book, there's some over here.